mistake. I mean, Ziggy getting around the port with that stupid coat, very similar. I was watching this episode and I thought that looks very similar to a coat in The Sopranos. What's its face gives Tony.
Oh, Richie, yeah, the
Yeah,
jacket.
yeah.
The jacket.
Yeah. It's a very similar jacket.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Serialized. I'm your host, Kino. We are continuing our discussion of The Wire with Season 2. And I'm joined for this breakdown by Snaz from the channel Snaz.17. He's a Wire content creator. Snaz, thank you so much for joining me on this.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, give our audience a quick introduction of yourself and where people can find you.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is Snaz.17. Now I mostly do Wire content. As I say, I'm looking to go into a channel very similar to yours, covering all sorts of TV, not just The Wire. I'd love to go into Game of Thrones and whatnot, but The Wire is definitely my forte. So if you want anything on The Wire, go to Snaz.17.
Now, it's interesting because obviously people can tell from your voice you're British, and you are not unique. And I actually know quite a few British people who really fell in love with The Wire, which is interesting because The Wire there's a lot of universal aspects to it, but it's very much about an American city and this kind of American culture. So what do you think it is about The Wire that really attracted you to it?
Well, we, from England, we have our own version of The Wire, and people are going to call me crazy, they might, but I feel like our Game of Thrones is very similar to The Wire. It's a very similar show there's no main character, it's a massive ensemble cast, and everybody's fighting for the same thing, everybody's fighting for the throne. And I got into Game of Thrones after I watched The Wire for the first time, actually. So I watched The Wire first, and I was like, I don't think I could fully appreciate it at the time. I didn't know what I was in for. I watched Game of Thrones. I love that. And I had people saying to me, well, The Wire is very similar. It's obviously, Game of Thrones is obviously set medieval England and whatnot, and The Wire's current day Baltimore. But people said, if you like Game of Thrones, you will like The Wire. And I got into The Wire. And dare I say, I think The Wire is it. I think it's far better than Game of Thrones. I think it's the pinnacle of television.
It's absolutely, it's Game of Thrones, The Wire, The Sopranos, HBO has these absolutely hit shows that just completely changed the landscape. And The Wire is definitely the least appreciated of those three. Game of Thrones gets a whole lot of press, Sopranos gets a whole lot of press, but The Wire is a very underrated show where it's like the people who watch it really love it, but it's not as mainstream as some of those other shows, which it really should be because it's just that incredible.
Well, dare I say, you don't, especially in Game of Thrones, you have these big payoff moments. And Game of Thrones is a show where you can watch the first season and you will be hooked. You will be hooked. I don't want to say the casual audience, but people that aren't as invested in TV, TV's not their life. They can watch a show like Game of Thrones or a Breaking Bad and get really invested in it. But The Wire, I feel it takes time. It takes several rewatches to even pick up a fraction of what the show's true intention. And that's the brilliance of it. You can't watch it one time and truly appreciate it. You need to watch, it's the same with The Sopranos. You need to watch it 50 times over. And I feel just a lot of people don't have that time, and I don't blame them for it. You can't watch, not everyone wants to watch a show 10 times over just to pick up all the nitty gritty details.
Absolutely. And there's also The Wire sort of deliberately doesn't give you a lot of those big payoffs. People went into season 1 expecting, this investigation is going to lead to justice. They're going to arrest the bad guys, and they do. But they get kind of a slap on the wrist, and it's the cops like McNulty who are actually in a worse spot at the end of season 1. And leading into season 2, which we'll talk about the reception to season 2 in a little bit, but season 2 was a stark departure from season 1, where it's not a completely different show. We follow a lot of the same characters from season 1, but the focus shifts from, the Barksdale crew, these drug dealers who we got to know in the first season, to the dock workers of Baltimore. And in hindsight, we know now that's the show, right? Every season's going to change the focus a little bit because ultimately it's trying to tell the story of Baltimore in general. But at the time, people were like, what's going on here? Why are we following a completely different storyline here? Why aren't we sticking with the same thing? Now, when you first saw season 2, like you didn't have, kind of the hindsight of the whole show, what did you think about that change?
The same as everybody else's. I thought, you've got season 1, it's worked, fans have loved it, we've gotten to know these characters, and now Ed Burns and David Simon were essentially saying, trust us, we're going to absolutely flip the script, we're going to flip it on its head, trust us, it's all going to pay off. And yeah, I mean, on the first watch, I was kind of on my phone half the time. I was just thinking, man, let me just get through this season so I can get to season 3, 4, and 5. Let me almost skip it, almost passively skip it. But it's the one season where you need to watch the show all throughout before it, how do I want to say this? Before it justifies its existence. You get that on the first watch, and then you watch it a second time, and then you can really appreciate all season 2 was trying to do. And I mean, now, I've watched The Wire. I don't even want to know how many times. But now, watching it that many times and knowing everything that was going to happen, I appreciate season 2 so much more than I did on my first watch.
Absolutely. And it is one of those it's one of the lower seasons in terms of, people rate it towards the bottom. It's that or season 5 that people like the least. But I think that, again, in hindsight, the themes that season 2 gets at are so important. It's, again, really telling the story of Baltimore, telling the story of kind of America and the world in general, the decline of the working class, the decline of industrialization, these people who are seeing their livelihoods disappear before their very eyes and are struggling, is one of the most important themes. And again, it moves the show from being beyond just being like cops and robbers type show into being a real nuanced look at American society.
Yeah, so the point is that, like, it takes a show from just a show about the streets to something about the whole system. Season 2 is really the introduction of, you get to see how the politicians, people like Andy Korchek, affect the drug trade in Baltimore. And you also get to see that it's not just the inner city black people that are having to resort to selling drugs. It's the white people on the docks as well. It's affecting the entirety of the city of Baltimore. You are having these dock workers who aren't getting any work because the politicians are wanting to build on the canals and whatnot. And it's like, okay, well, what other options do they have? There's no manufacturing jobs. They're not making steel anymore. No boats are coming into Baltimore because I think it was something to do with either the canal wasn't deep enough or wide enough for the big boats to come in. And they're having to resort to what the majority are having to resort to, that being drugs.
Absolutely. And, the racial angle of season 2, kind of focusing more on white characters, upset some people originally because, the first season of The Wire was one of the only shows that really the focus was on, kind of African Americans. It was like their kind of version of The Sopranos. And some of them did not like that the show changed the focus to white characters like that. In fact, infamously, when BET was airing The Wire, they had to shorten it for broadcast reasons. And so they cut out most of the dock scenes and just left the Barksdale scenes in prison that we see. And it's kind of a mess when you watch it. But David Simon and Ed Burns defended that by, again, like exactly what you said, showing that it's not an issue with just black people. It's an issue with white people. It's an issue with across the entire cities is complicit in what's going on here. And there's that focus on systems rather than individual characters, I think, is really what defines The Wire. Like, the people who are doing this stuff, even the corrupt, politicians and corrupt, city officials, it's not necessarily just that they're bad people. It's that there are larger external pressures that are moving people much more so than individual character decisions, which I think was, again, that focus is really what sets The Wire apart from your standard kind of drama show.
Well, I mean, I remember reading something. I think it was Michael K. Williams who played Omar. He had going back to what you said before, he had a major problem with, okay, season 1, we as an African American, we have something here. We have a really good show about our people and the people he represents. And then it goes to season 2 and it's all these white Polish guys at the docks. And I think Ed Burns said something like, if I start season 2 back in the pit, back in the towers, it's not going to do your world justice. It's not it's only going to show a tiny percentage of the problem, the real issue that's going on. Whereas when you go to the docs, and as you say, like this, they start introducing all the political stuff, like Valchek wanting to get the thing put in the church window, and Frank wanting to do it, and they're both trying to curry favour with the politicians, and all that trickles down, and it affects all these people on the street. It truly is. It truly shows the cycle of the game.
We now, looking back, understand that, like, yeah, the show can change the focus and then reintroduce elements, but to a lot of people, the first season of The Wire, while very critically acclaimed, did not have good ratings compared to shows like The Sopranos, which was a smash hit from the gate. And so for a lot of people, they thought, oh, you're trying to appeal more to like a white audience by focusing on white characters. But again, that's not the actual intention of the show. And I love the epigraph of the first episode of season 2, Ebb Tide, where it says, ain't never gonna be what it was, which I always thought was a very kind of tongue-in-cheek reference to them saying, look, the show is not going to be what it was before. We're always going to push and do something different with each season, which again became the kind of defining thing of The Wire that other shows, would try to copy later on with the whole, switching things up every season. And The Wire was just really ahead of its time with that kind of foresight.
Well, the show exists as well, partially. It is there to bring awareness to this problem. It's not, obviously, entertainment's at the forefront, but it is also, there is a real problem here, and The Wire is bringing awareness to that. It's not entertain, as I say, entertainment's at the forefront, but they're basically saying, this is what's happening. You're going to see what's happening in real life. If you don't like these characters, you can't sympathise with them, that's fine. But when we get to the end of the show, you're going to understand why we've made The Wire, why The Wire is a thing.
Absolutely. And I think, at least for me, you really do come to sympathize with Frank Sabatka. It's interesting when they first introduce him in this season, you think like, oh, okay, they're setting him up like another Kingpin type character like Avon, right? He's going to have his like drug empire on the docks, and it's going to be that same kind of story of trying to take him down. But as we go through the story, we realize, oh, he's not a kingpin. He's just a guy desperately trying to survive, doing what he can. And there's much larger, predators in this environment, like the Greeks, like Prop Joe, and he's still just a pawn, in this rigged game that he can't win. It's not going to work out. They're not going to turn back the industrial decline that we're seeing in America here. And the struggle is ultimately a tragic one. And I really love that aspect of it. I think that ending scene where Nikki is like at the gates, like looking through the docks, like holding on, like almost like a caged animal. It's one of the most powerful shots of the whole show.
Well, Frank Sabatka really is one of the few selfless characters on The Wire. Everything, or the majority of what he does, is for the future. It's not even for his kids, it's for his kids' kids. He really is trying to take them 100 years down the line. And I can't think of any action that he does where it's self-serving. It's what he wants to do. He doesn't want these drugs coming in. He needs money to get to the politicians who will then make the canal bigger, or dredge, what did they call it? Dredge the pier,
Dredging,
or whatever, dredging the canal, yeah.
Yeah.
But he needs some money. Where'd you get the money from to do something like that? And this is how these politicians work. You've got to give them, Clay Davis, you've got to give him a load of money before he'll even look your way. But as sad as it is, I think it was episode 2, one of the guys said to Sabatka, you need him on your side. Throw all your money at him, and then he'll get in touch with the right people and get you to do this. But he is truly a selfless character. Him, Bunny Colvin, you can sympathise with them.
Absolutely. Speaking of his son, Ziggy is one of those characters that people love to hate. It's similar to like AJ on The Sopranos, where it's like, man, this guy's so pathetic and stupid, and I hate this character. He's one of those ones, though, that like I think if you look past your initial reaction to him, again, you really see a tragic character here. Is he dumb? Absolutely. Is he kind of pathetic a lot of the time? Absolutely. But you see this kind of struggle, just like his father, to kind of find his own place in this world. And does he make terrible decisions? Yes, absolutely. But again, it's his kind of tragedy, and that scene where he's in the interrogation room or the prison room, whatever, with his dad and talking about all the decisions that kind of led him here. There's a great throwaway line where they talk about Frank's wife, who we never see on the show, but it kind of implies his wife is addicted to pills, and you just again you see this family is like barely holding on, right? They're going through all this terrible stuff, and it's led to this tragic fate here. But yeah, Ziggy's one of those characters who I think gets way too much hate, and I think if people could look past their bias towards him, they'd see a very interesting and tragic character.
He's a lot. He's in the same boat as a D'Angelo and Name and Bryce. Them people that have they've grew up under the leader of their respective organization. Frank Sobotka is Ziggy's father. Ziggy can essentially do whatever he feels. I mean, that's how he's introduced. He's introduced screwing up on the job. His dad fires him, and one of the other dock workers said, like, he's his son, he's not getting fired. He can essentially get away with everything. And we may not be able to sympathise with it. We may hate him. I definitely do. But I can understand that he's somebody who he's not been given everything, but he's been able to get away with everything. There is no punishment for what he does. There's no, like, as D'Angelo, he can get away with everything. There's very little punishment. He can go into an interrogation room. He can almost snitch. He can shoot someone. Because of the connections he has, whether it be his father or his uncle, he's able to get away with that stuff. And it ultimately is only going to breed somebody like Ziggy D'Angelo, who are very stupid, rather weak, just because they don't know any better. They haven't had to suffer the consequences of what everybody else would if they were to make a mistake. I mean, Ziggy getting around the port with that stupid coat, very similar. I was watching this episode and I thought that looks very similar to a coat in The Sopranos. What's its face gives Tony?
Oh, Richie, yeah, the jacket. Yeah. The jacket. Yeah.
It's a very similar jacket, but I'm watching it and I'm seeing him walk around with that just after being told, don't show any money. We haven't, we've just robbed a load of cameras, don't show any money. And he's flaunting it about and you're like, damn, I hate this guy. But then again, he's somebody who there's going to be no consequences to his actions. He's going to keep doing that unless Frank or someone steps in and truly punishes him.
What's funny, I mean, or not funny, but what's so sad is, when he steals the cars for the Greek, the guy who runs the store, he does a professional job. It's the one time he did it completely right. He did everything they were supposed to do, and the guy still screws him over because, again, he views him as weak. And his reaction to it is obviously, terrible, but you really feel like the fury of just like not being taken seriously, of being made fun of being bullied to some extent here, and that explosive kind of rage here. Obviously he shoots someone who's innocent. That's, terrible, but you really kind of understand that rage in that moment when he gets back in the car afterwards and realizes what he did. And he just sits there and waits for the cops to come. Again, it's sort of like AJ's, trying to kill Junior. I mean, I don't want to spoil Soprano stuff, but it's you feel that kind of impotent rage that he's got there. And again, I think that's very relatable to a lot of people. And I think people see more of themselves in Ziggy than they'd like to, which is why they don't like him. And again, it's the same thing with AJ. I think that like he reminds us of some of our worst qualities. A lot of us are probably closer to Ziggy than we are someone like Omar, if we're being real.
Oh, definitely. And you can understand what's brought into that. And as I say, there's so many dimensions to it because, as I was saying, you can almost understand, dare I say, sympathise with his stupidity. You see where it's coming from. But then there's this other side of the coin where, well, everybody's disrespecting him. Everybody's shitting all over him. And you can understand why he snaps. And then after it, you say, the realisation hits, the adrenaline completely leaves your system, and you're sitting in your car and you're like, wow, I've just ruined my life over one tiny little moment.
Which, again, we see that all the time in the show. That's the D'Angelo's beginning story. He did the same thing. He just shot some guy that he didn't need to shoot. And in his case, it worked out. But, I mean, not long term, it didn't work out. But in that case, it did.
But Ziggy's as well. Ziggy's could have worked out. The Greeks could have flipped that little kid in the store. They could have said, he could have said whatever. Even though they might not be thinking about it, they can kind of get away with stuff like this. D'Angelo can shoot somebody down with a load of witnesses and get away with it. Ziggy could have, if Frank took the deal with the Greeks, got away with killing the guy because he was disrespecting him in the store. And that's ultimate. That's the pinnacle of their character. That's what comes when you have people that have been brought up that don't have to suffer any of the consequences of their actions. They're going to carry on being stupid until they do something incredibly stupid, which results in them going to jail.
Absolutely. I think even Frank's brother says that to him. He's like, what'd you think was going to happen once they got a little taste of, you think they were going to suddenly go straight after that? Like, no, of course not. They're going to continue to do it. So, that storyline plays out the way it does. But we also have other ones going on here. Like, the Barksdales actually don't disappear. They're just not the forefront of the season. We continue on with this. And D'Angelo has a prominent storyline this season where he's, at the end of season 1, he's disillusioned with the life because of what they did to Wallace. He's thinking about flipping, but his mother ultimately convinces him to stay. But he comes to this kind of realization that he doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to be with his uncle anymore. He just wants to serve his time quietly and then just leave the life. But ultimately, Stringer takes him out. It's very interesting, this kind of animosity that Stringer has for D'Angelo. One, it's not necessarily personal. He thinks, he might have ratted on him before. He doesn't want to take that chance. He's very cold and logical. It's the same reason he killed Wallace, just to prevent the possibility. But, I don't know, it goes deeper than that on some level, because he's also sleeping with D'Angelo's, baby mom. I don't think they're married, but it's interesting how much he just sort of takes D'Angelo's life. What do you make of that storyline?
He's almost, I want to say he's almost envious. I mean, I did a whole video on this, why Stringer Bell really murdered D'Angelo. And I ultimately think he just wanted any excuse. He wanted any excuse where if he were to eventually get caught, he could say, no, I was more than justified in this. Because think about it, they're both, in a sense, the heir to the throne. D'Angelo's the only male that's come from the Barksdales. If Avon were to fall, as D'Angelo's mum says, you're going to have to step up. But Stringer's that second in command. He sees D'Angelo for what he is. He's a coward in a sense. He's not built for the game. As isn't Stringer, which we'll eventually learn in season 3. He also isn't built for the game, nor the business world. As Avon says, a man without a country. But as we were saying before, they're both more alike than they care to admit. And, D'Angelo proves himself. In season 1, D'Angelo proves himself. He's rather good with the money. He's good at business. He's earning loads of money in the pit. And Stringer praises him on that. But it just goes back to that. D'Angelo can screw up and Avon will bail him out. Can you say the same for Stringer? Can Stringer make such a mistake and will Avon bail him out? The answer in season 3 at least is no. He screws up. He tries playing Omar and brother against one another. He believes he's smarter than he actually is. And Avon's got a decision. Business or my lifelong partner.
We start to see the seeds of that this season where, Avon's in prison. He can't run things directly on the street like he's used to, although he does. And it creates this, we're seeing the first kind of rifts between Avon and Stringer, where Stringer wants to do things differently. He wants to partner with Prop Joe. He wants to, share their territory, which is something they'll obviously do with, the co-op. But Avon doesn't agree with this, and their different approaches and their Stringer's lack of transparency creates problems that, again, is going to result in his death in season 3. But we're seeing this kind of rift here at the end, and where, Avon kind of lectures Stringer about, like, this isn't about your business class, right? This is the streets. It doesn't come to a head this season, but they are really setting up.
The seeds are planted.
The seeds, exactly, of the conflict that's going to be the main focus of season 3.
And they do fall into a tricky situation because Avon, I think it was the Dominicans from New York, they cut ties with him. He was getting stuff from Atlanta, which was more expensive, but it was terrible. Everybody was coming back complaining. You see fights breaking out in the pit, people just beating on each other. And Stringer's, Prop Joe, dare I say, he notices this. And this is really his moment here to really start to separate Stringer and Avon from one another, to really plant the seeds in the Barksdale camp.
We'll just kind of continue on where we left off here. So if you're listening to this, we've been having some technical issues. It's not on either of our ends. It was the system we were using. So we apologize if the audio sounds like it's different because we're using a different recording device here. But let's continue where we left off. Do you remember what we were talking about?
Yeah. So we were getting to the good stuff. We were getting to Proposition Joe slowly starting to manipulate Stringer Bell. That's where we were. And I mean, as I was saying, so Avon and Stringer's conflict was that of they essentially needed a new supplier. They were cut off from their old one. And at D'Angelo's funeral, Prop Joe comes to Stringer. And he's like, okay, in turn for 50% of your territory, I'll give you some of my product. And that's the conflict now with Stringer and Avon for the rest of the season. Should Stringer take Prop Joe on his offer, or is Avon right in saying, we cannot give Joe a leg up, we cannot let Joe hold anything over us, because when the time comes, which eventually does come in Season 3, he's going to destroy them. You know what I mean? If you allow Joe to be the person to give you your product, he now has all that power. If he takes that away, or even threatens to, he can, I mean, as he does in Season 3, he threatens to take it away. And it's like, well, you have to abide. You have to do whatever Joe wants to do. And granted, what he wants to do is in effect right, which is end the war between Avon and Marlowe. Or it could go to anything. He's just, you're giving Prop Joe that power over you.
Prop Joe is a very interesting character. You know, we got introduced to him last season a little bit, but this is the season we start to kind of see his operation more, and we see that he's a very manipulative character. Like, he plays himself like he's like, oh, you know, sell for $1 or buy for $1, sell for $2. That's all I want, just to make a little money. But we really actually start to see that he has grander plans than just that. He does try to exploit his enemies and play them off each other. He's a very intelligent character, although we'll see him make some mistakes in Season 4 and 5. But yeah, he does exploit this rift here. He understands Stringer Bell. He understands what he wants. He wants to be legitimate. He wants to go. He wants to be more of a businessman. He plays him off like that. But just like we saw in Season 1 when he kind of played Omar against the Barksdales here, he's always working towards his own end. And the idea of the co-op is not a bad idea. We see that it actually does work. It works well. And all these drug dealers stop fighting and start working together. That's essentially what Mafia did with the Commission. It's like, hey, we're all going to be kind of governed here under one organization. And it does work. The problem is, again, that Stringer and Avon are not aligned. They're each kind of operating on their own thing here. And even though Avon should be the main boss and should be, it's his final word, Stringer is kind of working towards his own end separately. And that disconnect, again, is really what is going to lead to the Barksdale's downfall.
Apologies. I just want to go back to what you said before, that buy for $1, sell for $2. That saying, I feel, perfectly sums up the issues that they explore in the second season, which is that that's what everybody's doing. Everybody's putting their hand in somebody else's pocket. Andy Krocek's making money, just taking off others and selling it for more. Nothing's getting made anymore, and because nothing's getting made, there's no jobs. And, go back to what we were saying before, this is why these people like Nick and Ziggy are turning to drugs, because that's what everybody's doing. Everyone's buying for $1 and they're selling for $2, and that's the issue. And to also go back to what you said about the co-op being good, yeah, I mean, in theory, I'd say it's good, but I feel with the co-op, all it takes is for one person to, very similar to Amsterdam, all it takes is for one person to just buck the system, and you're right back to square one. Marlowe, if he's killing all your people on the corner, what's the point of the co-op? You know what I mean? If he's taking, as Slim Charles says in Season 4, if somebody's taking all the territory and he's not going to buy any of your product, what's the point? The co-op, everything that the co-op stands for, it can't run if there's somebody out there which is giving you no choice but to go to war. You know what I mean?
And again, they needed the enforcement angle, which again is what Avon was all about. The war, using force here. Stringer thought he could logic his way out of that situation, which, again, that's more of a discussion for Season 3, but we're seeing with Stringer this season that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. He thinks he can apply this business logic to the street, and it really doesn't work out. In fact, there's a great scene where he's going into his business class, and the teacher gives him his paper, and it's an A minus, which is a good grade. Don't get me wrong, but it shows he's not quite there. It's not quite where it needs to be. He's smart. He is intelligent. He's got these plans, but he just doesn't have the full picture of what this all means. He kind of thinks he can be just a businessman in a system here, which that is not how it works. So
he takes from that class. I mean, he gets advice on like changing the name of the drugs because they're so bad, and then all you have to do is change the name, and people are going to think it's something else. And he really starts to take all this stuff he's learning from his macroeconomics class. He starts taking it and applying it to the street. And I want to say it's at the end of. I want to say it's after Bodhi has that beef on the corner where they get into a shootout and that little kid gets shot, and he gives this speech about it's all about product over territory. Japanese cars are getting sold more than American cars in America simply because they've got the better product. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but such does not apply to the world of the street, especially not the world of the wire. You cannot apply the same logic from a bog standard business where you can open up a store. You can have 2 camera stores on a street. I can open mine at the end of the street. You can have yours at the other end. You're not going to come over and shoot me. But in the street, that's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. That's what Bodhi's crew does when he's fighting with that other crew, who are now starting to take over the towers because Bodhi's got nothing to sell. But Stringer's telling them, well, this is what I learned in my business class. Let's apply it here. And it just all goes wrong. This is when it first starts to go wrong. And season 2 is the season where Stringer, he showed a bit in season 1, but he really starts to show in season 2 just how inept he is. And I mean, it's the same, you could say the same about The Sopranos, the second in command to Tony. Some people are just better as a second.
Again, it really, that storyline and that analysis really comes to a head in season 3, but it's like Stringer was sort of delusional. Again, he thought he could be more tthan what he is. Avon, for all his faults, and he has some too, understood his place on the board, which is why he survives at the end. I mean, yes, he's in prison, but even in prison, he's still a kingpin, right? He's still this authority figure because he really understood his place in the game. And we see all the time when people try to escape their role, when they try to be more than what they are, the game punishes them. Again, not just the drug game, but the larger game and systems in Baltimore. It's like, you have to kind of stick in your lane, and if you try to get out of it, the system heavily punishes you for that. The powers that be punish you for that. So yeah, we're obviously seeing that, really, start this season. It also, I mean, we should talk about the investigation because that is, the other big part of this season. They're investigating this murder of these prostitutes on the dock. McNulty's on the boat at the beginning of the season. I just have to say, I love that moment when he works around the clock to prove that the bodies were in Baltimore PD's territory. And all these police officers are fighting to not have the case, right? They're fighting to be like, no, it's not our responsibility. It's a great show of how these bureaucracies actually work in the real life.
And that, I almost want to say that relates back to the very first scene of the show where it's like, nobody wants to take responsibility. Nobody wants to say they're responsible for anyone or anything. And the theme of season 2, death of work in America. You can also say these people are trying to dodge work. They don't want anything. They don't want to work this case. They don't want anything to do with it. And such as well, I feel like it adds layers to McNulty. I mean, we got to see it a lot in season 1, and it's the same in season 2 where he does feel like he has to be the one to work this. He has to be the one to do what's right, you know what I mean? He has to find out who these girls are, and he has to bring their killer to justice. But then it's also like, yeah, that's one hand, but on the other hand, he just wants to screw the bosses. As you say, he just wants to get one over on Rawls. He wants to mess up the department and whatnot, and it does it does come at the cost of Bunk, Lester, and I think Ray Cole as well, who has to work the case, and he says, if I'm screwing Rawls, it's a win.
Absolutely. And it's, he swears he's going to, find out who these girls were and give them a name and stuff like that. But he doesn't. Like, yes, they do discover basics of what happened to them, and they discover the basics of who, killed them. But they don't ever bring them justice. One, because the guy got killed, but also they fail to do that. Like, it doesn't work out. His oath to kind of solve the case doesn't work out, and the Greeks escape. So, again, I think that might be why people found the season very unsatisfying. Even compared to season one, they do arrest the Barksdales. Do they get a slap on the wrist? Yes, absolutely. But there is a sense that, like, okay, the case resolved. In this case, nothing resolves. The Greeks just leave. All their witnesses are kind of dead. A few of them go to jail. But it really feels like, okay, this investigation did not lead anywhere directly. Yes, the team is back together now, and they're going to be investigating the Barksdales again in the third season. But I think that is part of the reason why people feel like this season is not a very exciting or satisfying storyline.
You do get to see, though, I do think as well, like, with the drug aspect of it, it is good and it is important because we are learning about the city of Baltimore in its entirety. And it is good to see. Season 1, they shows how they distribute the drugs. Season 2, how are they getting into the country? Who are the people bringing them in? What are they like? How do they run their operation compared to somebody on the street like an Avon or a Prop Joe?
It's interesting with the Greeks. They're this very mysterious faction. Like, we do see them throughout the show, but we never really get to discover who they are. In fact, Greek is this very mysterious character where he says at the end, "I'm not even Greek," and that's led to a lot of debate about, like, what is he really Greek? Is he not Greek? Some other weirdness, like the fact that in Spiros' first episode, I don't remember if it's literally episode 1, but the first time we hear him talk, he has an American accent, the actor, and then later on he has this kind of Greek one, which has led to a lot of debate whether that was just kind of a mistake where they, in the first episode, they didn't tell him to speak in a Greek accent, or whether he was putting on a fake American accent. It's this whole thing with them. But they're an interesting faction who we never really get to understand, which is also, I think, part of the point. They're just this kind of larger than the story that they're telling faction of drug dealers or drug manufacturers.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of them things with the, when you bring up the accents, that's all over. I mean, McNulty has to do his British accent in season 2, and obviously Dominic West is, from the same side of the pond as me. Yeah, they slip up a few times. I mean, Jimmy slips up loads throughout the show. He, the cracks, you really start to notice that he is a British guy. However, I do give Idris Elba credit because he's British, and I can only think of one scene where he slips up and really lets out.
In the copy shop when he's lecturing his guys, you can hear the accent a little bit.
I feel it's when him and Avon fight. I think he tells him. I think it was when he told him that what he did to D'Angelo, that he had to kill Dean. He pushes him to the ground and he's like, I did this for you, killer. And I just think, wow, that's so British. Like, this is not an American guy.
he slips up occasionally. It's still an incredible performance, right?
Yes,
but
definitely.
You do hear it occasionally. How did, when McNulty did his, like, fake British accent where he's intentionally playing a character who can't do a British accent, how did that sound to you as a native speaker?
It was funny when Lester gave him credit. When Lester said, "Oh, it's all right. It's not that good. You don't sound that British," and I'm like, it does crack me up.
That's obviously very funny, very deliberate tongue-in-cheek there. I'm trying to think of the other storylines we have this season. Obviously, Beatty is a character they introduce who leaves at this season, but we're gonna be reintroduced to her at the end of next season. She's gonna play a big part of McNulty's story.
The main conflict: Stan Valchek versus Frank Sobotka. Stan and Frank this is the one season where we get to see Stan Valchek doing a tiny bit of police work when he's trying to get the fingerprints off of that photo when Frank stole the surveillance van.
The whole storyline with Frank and Valchek is, again, I love these like one-off lines they have where they don't have to tell you the whole backstory, but you understand, like, okay, this is a real thing where these guys know each other, where Frank says to him, my sister or whatever, used to say that you couldn't even get a girl to dance with you at the dances or whatever. So it's like you really feel okay. These guys grew up in the same neighborhood. They went to the same school. They know each other, and it really makes details like that really make the world feel believable. Where it's like, yeah, in a city like Baltimore, you would probably know a lot of these people. You would have run into them. You would have been at the same schools as them. There's these existing relationships that predate the plot that we're following.
Yeah, it's very interesting as well, like, the whole, I want to say, logistics behind, like, their beef with one another. Trying to get the thing in the window of the church. And it's all just to get in with the politicians. That's all it is. But where Frank has a noble reason, Stan Valchek's just selfish. He's a hack. And it is a shame, like, he does bring the end of Frank Sobotka, who was trying to do right by his entire union, his entire, everybody on his workforce, and here comes Stan. And, it happens all the time in The Wire. The bad guys win.
There's a great line he has at the end, though, when he's learned that, Frank is dead, and he gets another picture of his van in, like, Australia or something, and he laughs a little bit, and he's like, I think he says in Polish, something like, goodbye, Frank, or something like that. So it's this little moment. Again, it doesn't redeem him or anything like that, but it's a nice little moment where they're like, good on you that you played me like this. There's a modicum of respect there that, again, does not redeem him in any way, but it shows he's not just a completely heartless monster. There's some, there's some relationship there between the characters, even though it's mostly a negative. The Wire is full of stuff like that.
And it is one of those shows where no matter how terrible you think these guys are, like, no matter how much flack I just gave Stan Valchek then, you can still, and what we were saying about Ziggy before, you can still understand how people like this can come to be. How somebody can become so corrupt, because all Stan's doing, he's just playing the game. He's just trying to climb the ranks of his organisation. He is just playing the game, and it ultimately rewards him come the very end of the show. And that's all come from season 2.
Absolutely. We're setting all that up here. I think that kind of covers a lot of what I wanted to talk about with season 2. Were there any other stuff you wanted to bring up about this season?
I mean, it's The Wire. We could be here till tomorrow. You know what I mean? There's so much to talk about when it comes to Wire. But I do want to bring up as well, and you'll get to talking about this when you start talking about season 5, the conclusion of the dock workers. Frank goes. Supposedly the Greeks go with him. Drugs leave. And you might think, well, the drugs are gone. We're no longer bringing any heroin into Baltimore, or not through the docks anyway. But because of that, now all the dock workers are homeless. They all end up under the tunnels, yeah.
That's a great point. Yes, one of those guys is, I can't remember his name. It was something 50. I think there's Johnny 50 or something.
Johnny 50, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the homeless guys they see. There's real consequences to that. And of course, they have the cameo from Nick at the end here, which I guess the implication is that he left witness protection and kind of returned to the dock. But yeah, that's Carcetti's breaking ground on a new apartment building, which is, again, putting these dock workers out of work. Now, I've heard from people that in real life, the Baltimore docks are actually doing fairly well. There's a lot of traffic going through there. But again, in the context of the story, we understand it's part of this larger deindustrialization movement, exactly like Spiro says in one of the epitaphs. They used to make steel there, no? So yeah, we're really seeing that, like, for a lot of these guys, their way of life in a post-industrial society is crumbling before them, and there's nothing to replace that. These guys don't really have a way to adapt to the newer life that's being created here. It's just for the rich people. So yeah, that's absolutely a huge part of the season.
And that very line that Spiros or Vondas, whatever you want to call him, when he says to Frank, yeah, like, did they used to make steel there, the smoke from the stacks? It's, because when he says that line, Frank's out. The police are investigating his guys, a grand jury in them, and he's like, no, I don't need this trouble. But then Spiros reminds him, he manipulates him, obviously, but he reminds him that there's no jobs anymore. Your guys need this, and you're not just fighting for you. You are fighting for your grandkids. You're fighting for your grandkids' kids. Your actions, no matter how moral, no matter how immoral, or how badly they affect you and your guys in the present day, you are fighting for the future. And as well, to your Andy Krorchek, that's another major conflict. The Docks versus Andy Krorchek. Can they get the canal dredged, or is Andy going to put his big development there and season 5 pays that off? You've lost. Andy has won. And even at the end of the show, he's with Marlo at that party, and that all comes from him wanting to build, what was it, a condominium or whatever it was in season 2. And it just, he wins. It's tragic, but I mean, better in real life, as you say now. Baltimore Docks is getting way more than what Frank was getting in the show. But yeah, in the world of the show, it's tragic, but they lose.
They do, yes. And not the only faction that happens to. We see that, through a lot of these police departments get gutted. They can't do the work they want to do. That's just a common thread throughout all of the seasons. The Baltimore Sun gets gutted. They can't do what they are supposed to be doing. We're seeing that throughout the show. But again, this season in particular really nails that home, and again sets up those kind of larger themes, which at the time I understand that it was hard to realize that. I went going into the season, I knew that each season is going to be different. I'd heard people talk about the show, and they had said that like, oh yeah, season 2 is kind of not as well regarded as the rest of them. But I didn't understand all of this until I had seen the whole thing. But it's like you said, it's one of those things you really have to watch it multiple times to get it, which is not a cop out. I think it's like some people say that like you have to spend 100 hours on it before it makes sense, and I think you can get a lot of enjoyment from the season if you kind of set your expectations aside. I think there's a lot of great material here, but it is one of those things that's like a lot of this stuff is only apparent in hindsight once you have the full picture.
That's what makes these shows so timeless. So I mean, as you said at the start, The Wire, Sopranos, they're all in the same boat of, I could watch these shows in 50 years and they'd still be as entertaining. I'd still pick up new stuff, and they'd still, I don't know what you want to call it, but they'd still be able to relate to this time. The problems in that show, we're seeing this today in the real world. We're still seeing these problems are still very real, and I think these shows are just gonna be there forever. There's gonna be stuff to talk about. The Wire, Sopranos. You're gonna be able to talk about these shows until you're dying.
Yeah, good shows never, like these truly great shows will never be, outdated, because, storytelling like this gets at the heart of issues where even if situations change, like we said about the Docks, like maybe it's not the exact same situation as the show describes. It's not just about the Docks, it's about the larger issues that we're seeing across Baltimore and across America and across the world, to be honest. So, it'll never be outdated. There'll always be something you can relate to with shows like this and The Sopranos and all those type of shows. So yeah, and an incredible season. Is it one of the weaker ones overall? You could argue that in terms of like maybe some of the characterizations and stuff like that, but like Lester says, like all the pieces matter, right? It's like every single element of this show is a part of the larger narrative, and even if it's not the best overall, it's still an important part of it.
It is a shame because, you know what I mean, I don't really hold the Doc characters. When we're talking about, who are your favourite characters on The Wire, nobody's talking about Nikki and Frank Sobotka. But, I mean, it's the same with the characters in the newsroom or the school teachers. They have only been given one season to really cement their legacy, whereas Avon, Marlowe, McNulty, Lester, all the people in the police force, even like Thomas Carcetti and Mayor Royce, they have 2-3 seasons to really get in with the audience. And to go back to what you were saying about writing, I mean, you see it in shows today a lot, like, season 2 was a risk. And they did, you see, what's the show today? Severance. I feel like with that, the writing, they're taking such a risk. They're doing what Ed Burns did for The Wire in season 2. They're saying, trust us. You may not understand it all now. You may not be able to see the bigger picture. But when you finish the show, you will understand why we've done what we've done. Trust us. And that's what makes it so much greater. It just makes it amazing.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It was great talking with you. Guys, if you want Wire content, go check out the channel. I'm going to link it in the description of this video. some absolutely fantastic Wire videos, and I think there's going to be some more stuff coming from you of other shows as well, which I'm really excited about. But it was really great to meet you. I love breaking down shows like this with people who are so passionate about it. Like there's this niche of content creators who don't just make videos about, whatever popular show is out there, but really deep dive on these type of, critically acclaimed shows. That part of the reason why I started this podcast is I want to foster this kind of community of people who love shows like this. So again, thank you so much for joining me on this.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, man. I've loved being on, and I cannot wait to see what everybody else has to say about the other 4 seasons of the show. I'm excited.
We got some other content creators who are going to be breaking down the rest of the season, so definitely stay tuned for that. It's going to be a great time. Thank you guys so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode coming soon.